She had timed it perfectly. That's the part that still makes my stomach turn, even now, not just what she did, but the precision of it. She knew exactly when I'd be gone. She knew exactly how long it would take. And she made sure every last trace of my daughter's world was packed into boxes before I pulled back into the driveway. I remember the moment I saw the van. One of those plain white cargo vans parked halfway up the curb in front of our house. Back doors swung wide open. For a second, I thought I had the wrong address. I'd been driving on autopilot, the kind of numb that settles into your bones after 4 hours at a children's hospital, watching your 5-year-old sleep through a round of IV antibiotics, memorizing the sound of the monitors, counting the tiles on the ceiling so you don't fall apart in front of the nurses. I had come home only because Marcus had texted me that he'd stay the night at the hospital with Sophie, and someone needed to feed the dog and get a few hours of sleep before the morning labs. I sat in my car for a moment, engine still running, trying to make sense of the van. Then I saw my mother-in-law step out the front door carrying a laundry basket full of stuffed animals. Sophie's stuffed animals. I turned off the engine. I picked up the small paper bag from the passenger seat, the one with Sophie's favorite crackers and the new coloring book I'd bought her at the hospital gift shop, the one with the horses on the cover, because she was obsessed with horses, and I walked toward the house. My mother-in-law saw me coming. She didn't flinch. That's the thing about Evelyn, she never flinches. She has this way of squaring her shoulders that tells you she has already decided she is right, that she has already rehearsed the justification, that whatever you are about to say has already been dismissed in her mind before it leaves your mouth. "Rachel," she said. The way she always says my name, like it's a mild inconvenience. "What is happening right now?" I asked. She set the basket down on the porch steps. Inside, I could see Mr. Bear, the stuffed elephant Sophie had named Gerald, the small pink bunny my mother had given her the Christmas before she passed. "I'm getting this room ready," she said. "Derek and Carla need a nursery." I looked past her into the house. There were 2 men I had never seen before moving Sophie's bookshelf toward the door. Her bookshelf, the white one, with the painted butterflies that my mother and I had spent an entire weekend choosing at a furniture store in Savannah. "That is my daughter's room," I said. "Sophie isn't using it right now. She isn't using it because she is in the hospital." Evelyn made a small sound, the kind that isn't quite a sigh, but is meant to perform patience. "She'll be home soon, and she can sleep in the guest room. The nursery makes more sense in that space, better natural light, closer to the main bathroom." I stood there on the porch, and I felt something inside me go very quiet. Not calm, the opposite of calm, actually the kind of quiet that happens right before something breaks. I should tell you about Sophie's room, because you need to understand what it was. It wasn't just a room. My mother, Grandma Ruth, as Sophie called her, had spent the last real stretch of her good health decorating that room before Sophie was born. She'd stenciled little wildflowers along the baseboard with a tiny brush because the sticker decals looked cheap to her, and she'd wanted something real. She'd sewn the curtains herself, yellow cotton with small white dots, and hung them with curtain rods she'd found at an estate sale and spray-painted gold. When Sophie was 2, my mother sat on the floor of that room for 3 hours helping her sort a bucket of plastic farm animals into categories, horses in one pile, cows in another, even though walking had started to become difficult for her by then. My mother passed when Sophie was 3. Sophie still sometimes opens the curtains in that room and says she can smell her grandma in the fabric. I have never been able to explain to her that grief does, that love makes you find the person you've lost in everything around you. I just tell her, "Yes, baby, Grandma Ruth put a lot of love into those curtains." Evelyn had never once acknowledged the room's significance. She'd never really acknowledged my mother at all, except to say once, at a Sunday dinner, that it was a shame Ruth hadn't pushed Rachel to finish her graduate degree before starting a family. Marcus had changed the subject. I had excused myself to use the bathroom and stood over the sink for a moment with the water running. Evelyn had never approved of me. I understood that early. I was not from the right kind of family. In her view, my father had left when I was 9. My mother had worked 2 jobs. We'd rented apartments my whole childhood while Evelyn's family had owned property for 3 generations. Marcus had grown up in a house with a 3-car garage and a mother who hosted fundraising dinners and cared very much about appearances. When Marcus brought me home the first time, Evelyn had looked at me the way you look at something that doesn't quite fit where it's been placed. She loved Derek's wife Carla without reservation. Carla came from a family with the right last name. Carla had the right jewelry, and the right college, and the right way of laughing at Evelyn's stories. When Carla and Derek announced they were expecting, Evelyn had cried real tears at the dinner table and pulled Carla into a long hug. When Marcus and I announced we were expecting Sophie 4 years earlier, Evelyn had nodded and said, "Well, you'll want to get that second car situation sorted out before the baby comes." I watched her now from the porch, waiting for some version of an apology or an explanation that made sense, and none came. "You had no right to come into this house," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "Marcus gave me a key years ago. Marcus's name is not on the deed to this house." She blinked. That one landed. I could see it by the slight pause before she recovered. "This is a family matter, Rachel." "You're right," I said. "It is, and this is my family's home. My name is on the deed. My mother left me this house." I set Sophie's paper bag down on the porch railing. "So I need you to call those men back in here right now and have them put everything back exactly where they found it. Derek and Carla need." "I don't care what Derek and Carla need," I said. "My daughter is 4 miles away in a hospital bed with a fever that hasn't broken in 6 days, and you came into her room while I was sitting next to her IV drip and you were putting her things in boxes. Do you understand how that sentence sounds?" Evelyn lifted her chin. "Sophie will recover. Children are resilient. And this baby is coming, whether you've made your peace with it or not. Derek deserves a nursery at a family home where the baby can spend weekends and holidays. They have their own home. Their apartment is on the 3rd floor. No elevator. It's not practical for an infant." I looked at her for a long moment. There was something she'd said that snagged in my mind, a word she'd used. Deserves. Derek deserves a nursery. She'd been saying a version of that sentence my entire marriage, in different contexts, in different rooms. Derek deserves more consideration. Derek deserves the beach house this summer. Derek deserves to be heard here. Always Derek, always framed as fairness, when what she really meant was preference. I pulled out my phone, not to call Marcus. I didn't want to pull him away from Sophie's bedside for this. I opened my contacts and I scrolled to a name I hadn't used in a while. And then I stopped. I thought about something Carla had told me 8 weeks ago, sitting across from me in a coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a mug, her eyes red. She had asked me not to say anything. She had said she wasn't sure what she was going to do. She had trusted me because, she'd said, "You're the only one in that family who doesn't have an agenda." I had kept her secret. I had not told Marcus. I had not told anyone. I looked at Evelyn, standing on the porch of my mother's house, holding my daughter's stuffed elephant. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "Before we go any further, I need you to answer one question honestly." She gave me the patient, suffering look she reserved for conversations she considered beneath her. "What question?" "When Derek told you about the baby," I said carefully, "did he mention anything about their situation? Anything that gave you pause at all?" She frowned. "What are you talking about? Did Carla tell you anything? About the pregnancy? About when she found out?" "Rachel, I really don't see what this has to do with." "Because I need you to think," I said, "about whether you know this is Derek's baby." The porch went very quiet. Evelyn's face did something complicated. The certainty in it cracked, not much, just enough. "What did you just say?" "I'm not saying anything definitively. I'm asking if you know. If you've asked. If anyone has discussed it." I held her gaze. "Carla talked to me. I'm not going to share what she told me. That's between her and Derek. And frankly, it's between her and her conscience. But I think before you box up my daughter's childhood and hand it over to a nursery for a baby that may or may not carry this family's genetics, you might want to have that conversation with your son." Her mouth opened and then closed. She looked, for the first time in the 7 years I'd known her, genuinely uncertain. "You're lying," she said. "I'm not lying, Evelyn. You know I'm not. You've always been able to tell when I'm lying because you've been watching for it since the day Marcus introduced us." I picked up Sophie's paper bag from the railing. "Now please have these gentlemen put my daughter's bookshelf back against the wall. And when they're done, I need your key. Not a copy, the original one. Because tomorrow morning I'm calling a locksmith and having every lock in this house changed. And I'm asking Marcus to put a camera on the front door, and I need you to understand that this is not a negotiation." She didn't move for a moment. Then she turned to the 2 men and told them in a low voice to bring the bookshelf back inside. Neither of them looked at either of us. They carried it back through the door with the efficient discomfort of people who have witnessed too many of these moments on the job. I went inside and began putting Sophie's stuffed animals back onto her shelves one by one, in the order she keeps them: Mr. Bear on the far left, because he is the oldest and the biggest; Gerald next, because he is Mr. Bear's best friend; and the pink bunny at the end nearest the window because Sophie says she likes to look at the moonlight. I heard Evelyn's van pull away 20 minutes later. I sat down on the floor of my daughter's room, and I let myself cry for a little while, not about Evelyn, exactly, but about everything that had accumulated around that moment. The hospital, the fever, the small hand that had gripped mine that morning, while the nurse changed the IV site, the way Sophie had asked me if she was going to miss her class's spring field trip to the botanical garden, and I had said I didn't know yet, which was the honest answer, but I could see in her face that she knew what it meant. I called Marcus that night, after the dog was fed and I'd made myself eat something, and the house was quiet. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. "She had my old key," he said finally. "I gave it to her years ago when we needed someone to watch the dog for a weekend. I didn't think." "I know," I said. "It's done. I just need you to know. I'm going to call her, Marcus." I waited until I could hear his full attention. "I need you to not call her tonight. I need you to sit with Sophie tonight, and I need you to come home in the morning, and I need us to decide together what we want to say and how we want to say it. Because whatever you say to your mother tonight will not be measured, and whatever she says back will not be measured. And Sophie will be 20 feet away through a hospital wall." Another silence. Then, "You're right. I know. How is the room?" "It's okay. Everything's back. The curtains are still there." I heard him exhale. "Rachel, I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "Go be with Sophie." I spent the night in Sophie's room. Not in her bed. I sat in the small reading chair in the corner, the one my mother used to sit in when she read to Sophie. And I kept the lamp on low, and I listened to the house settle around me the way old houses do, the particular language of beams and floorboards that I'd learned over 6 years of living here. This house had been my mother's before it was mine. She'd bought it in her early 40s, after the divorce, working a day job and a weekend job and putting a little aside each month until she had enough for a down payment. She told me once that owning a home was the closest thing to freedom she'd found, that no one could change the locks on you in a house with your name on the deed. I hadn't understood what she meant when she was alive. I understood it now, sitting in her chair, in the room she'd stenciled with wildflowers. By the morning, the locksmith had confirmed a noon appointment, and I had begun the process of documenting the incident. I took photos of everything, wrote out a timeline, sent it to myself in an email so it was time-stamped. When Marcus came home at 10, he looked exhausted in the way that only happens inside a children's hospital. That particular hollowing that comes from days of fluorescent light and quiet worry. I made him coffee and we sat at the kitchen table together, and I walked him through everything. He sat with it for a while without saying anything. "She told you it was for the nursery," he said. "For the baby," I said. "Because Derek deserves a family home where the baby can come for weekends." Marcus rubbed his face. "The baby is going to be 5 blocks away in their apartment." "This makes no sense." It made sense to her. He looked at me. "What did you say to her?" "You said you told her something." I had thought about this part. I had thought about what Carla had told me, and what I owed her, and what I owed my husband, and where those two things met or didn't. I told her that before she makes plans around this baby, she should have a real conversation with Derek and Carla about the pregnancy. I didn't say more than that. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Is there something I should know?" "That's between Derek and Carla," I said carefully. "I only know what I was told in confidence, but Evelyn came into this house and made decisions based on an assumption, and I think the assumption deserves to be tested." He nodded slowly. He didn't push. That is one of the things about Marcus. I have always trusted he knows when to hold still. The locksmith came at noon, and by 1 o'clock we had new locks on every door. Marcus drove to his mother's house and retrieved the old key himself. He told me later that she had cried, which was not something Evelyn did easily, and that she'd said I was hostile and had always been hostile, and that she was only trying to help her family. He told me he'd said that this was our home, and that what she'd done was a violation of our trust regardless of her intentions, and that the house would not be available as a staging ground for decisions that hadn't been discussed with us first. She had not apologized, He had not expected her to. Sophie came home 11 days later. Her fever had finally broken on day 8. The kind of relief that doesn't fully arrive until you're watching your child eat half a sandwich and complain that the hospital jello tasted like plastic. She walked in through the front door in her yellow raincoat, even though it wasn't raining, and went straight to her room the way children do, instinctively checking on their own things. She stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her shelves. "Mr. Bear is in the right place," she said. "Of course he is," I said from behind her. She looked over her shoulder at me with the particular solemnity that 5-year-olds produce when they are being serious. "Mom, did someone move him?" I crouched down to her level. "Someone tried to. I put him back." She considered this. "Who moved him?" "It doesn't matter. He's back now, and nobody's moving him again." She looked at the shelf for another moment, and then nodded. The way people nod when they've decided to trust you on something, and went in and sat down cross-legged on the rug, and picked up Gerald, and started telling him about the hospital, in a quiet, detailed, running commentary that I stood in the doorway and listened to for longer than I probably should have. Carla called me 3 weeks after that. Her voice was different from the last time I'd heard it, steadier, I thought, but also like something had been set down. She told me she had told Derek the truth. She said it had been the hardest conversation of her life, and she didn't know yet what was going to happen between them, but that she needed to tell me first that she was sorry for putting me in the position of knowing something I hadn't asked to know, and second that she'd heard from Evelyn, and that Evelyn had said things to her that she would not repeat to me, out of basic decency. "How is she taking it?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "Badly. She keeps using the word bloodline." I didn't say anything to that. She called me. Carla said, and asked me how I could do this to the family, and I said to her, "Evelyn, you went into your daughter-in-law's house while her daughter was in the hospital and dismantled a 5-year-old's room. Let's talk about what we've each done to this family." There was something in that sentence that I sat with for a while after we hung up. Evelyn had spent 7 years reminding me, in small and medium and large ways, that I was not quite what she'd imagined for her son, that my family's history was not the right kind of history, that the house I lived in only mattered because Marcus lived in it too. She had looked at Sophie and seen the parts she approved of Marcus's jaw, the family's eye color, and she had been correct about those things. But she had been looking for herself in a child who was also mine, and mine came from my mother, and my mother had spent a weekend with a small brush putting wildflowers along a baseboard so her granddaughter would know she was loved before she even arrived. Evelyn had walked into a room full of that and seen an inconvenience, a problem of square footage, a logistics question with an obvious solution. I don't think she'll ever understand what she walked into that day. I don't think she is capable of understanding it, and I've made my peace with that. There are people who move through the world measuring it entirely in terms of what belongs to them and what doesn't, what serves their purposes and what doesn't, and all the other things, the curtains and the stuffed animals and the small wildflowers along the baseboard, are just furniture. What I know is this. My daughter came home to a room that was hers. She comes in most mornings now and opens the curtains my mother made, the yellow ones with the white dots, and the light comes through, and she says good morning to her animals the way children do, in a very particular order, always starting with Mr. Bear. She started first grade in September, and came home the first week with a drawing she'd made at school, asked to draw something that made her feel safe. Her teacher had said, and she drew her room, with the bookshelf and the butterflies and the yellow curtains and a small figure of a woman sitting in the reading chair in the corner. She put it on the wall above her headboard with 3 pieces of tape. When I saw it, I asked her who the woman in the chair was. She looked at me like I'd asked a very obvious question. "Grandma Ruth," she said. "She watches me sleep." I didn't trust myself to say anything. So I kissed the top of her head, and pulled her blanket up, and turned off the lamp, and I stood in the hallway for a moment with my hand against the wall. Some things cannot be packed into boxes. You can try, you can show up with a van and a plan, and the confidence of someone who has never had to fight for anything, but the room remembers. The curtains hold the light the same way they always have. The wildflowers are still there, along the baseboard, faint now, patient, exactly where my mother put them. The locks have been changed. The key is gone. The alarm goes on every night at 10, and Sophie's animals are exactly where they belong.